Welcome to a special edition of the Be Brilliant People podcast, a new series I'm launching called the ND Superstars, which is for short term for the Neurodivergent Superstars. So this is episode 1 of my new series of podcasts, and in each podcast episode, I hope to bring on people that are just doing fantastic people and doing fantastic things in this space, and kind of hopefully going to share their stories on this podcast about their real lived experience of being neurologically different and diverse, as well, and what that means, and some of that story as well. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my first guest onto the new podcast, Nicole McGill-Higgins, and Nicole. Hi, Nicole. Nicole, let me just give you a little bit of an intro, and you can kind of like let our listeners know a bit more about you in a minute. But I've known Nicole a few years now, from meeting in various conferences and things like that, and we've kind of like built a fantastic relationship together, and a real kind of like deep connection and understanding. Really cemented by the fact that we both have a deep fascination and love of bees as well in all that we do as well. So that was the first kind of thing I think that helped kind of like attract me towards Nicole, was the kind of love of bees and the connection. And then we kind of got talking and hit it off, and we kind of really felt we've got a really deeper connection in terms of like the changes that we are passionate about and want to make in society, and in the world as well. So listen, Nicole's a gifted speaker. She's an ED&I specialist, a specialist on belonging, a global best-selling author, and an all-round amazing human being, basically. And that's just a very short introduction to Nicole. And I say I've known Nicole a few years now. But Nicole, tell us in your own words, tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Oh God, I always find it so difficult in terms of who are you? What do you do? I think the best thing for me to say is that I'm a positive disruptor, and I do that through a coaching methodology. I am a coach. I'm an accredited coach. I'm literally doing my master coaching qualification at the moment, so I'm super excited about that. But my thing really is my playground is belonging. It's around that. Hence, you've got the Belonging by Nicole McGill-Higgins. And my thing is really around people showing up and having the courage to show up really, and to just be themselves. And I saw this quote the other day that was like, just be who you are, the world will adjust.
Yeah,
And I loved it because it's like we're in this space now where we have to try and fit in. And I
yeah,
use the word fit almost in a sarcastic way for me.
yeah,
Um, so belonging for me really is around feeling welcome, feeling accepted, and being authentic. And I know that word's being used a lot at the moment around be your authentic self. What does that actually mean? But from a coaching perspective, I
mm,
would say to somebody, what does authentic mean to you? And whatever that means to you, that's who you should be. So it's
yeah,
not my version of authentic or my version of bring your whole self or what all of that kind of jargon and trendy kind of terminologies that we've brought into the diversity and inclusion space. I think the final destination, or the destination, should I say, should be belonging.
yeah,
And I just basically help to navigate that in organizations, building that strategy and approach. And I also do that through training and coaching senior leaders. And I just coach people individually as well who just wants to step into their power to be able to have the courage. So that's what one of my signature programs called the Courage to Be. And the reason why I've called it the Courage to Be is that the word be after be is up to you to fill that in. So it's the courage to be curious, the courage to be able to say no, the courage not to procrastinate, the courage, whatever that word after the be is for you individually. And I think in this time and age, again, um, it's difficult to be us. Who are
mm,
we underneath all the labels that society gives us?
mm,
Who are we once we strip all of that back? And do we have the courage to kind of shake all of that off and dismantle those labels and just show up as Nicole, show up as Mike, show up as
yeah,
whoever that person is? And that's really important to me. And that's what I love with coaching, and especially with the diversity and inclusion space. People don't have the courage to say things. If I was to put a pound, Mike, for every time someone said to me, Nicole, I just don't want to say the wrong thing, so I just don't say anything. I have a
yeah,
lot to say, but I don't want to get it wrong. And I think that takes courage also. And the other thing I would say, um, Mike, is that I think as adults we lose our curiosity.
mm,
You know, if anyone's been around any child, I can assure you, I've got 4 grandchildren. And the amount of times, why, grandma, why, but
Mm,
why, but why?
mm, mm,
You know, and we love the curiosity in children. And then when we get to a certain age, that's taken away from us. And I
mm,
think curiosity is really, really important. And of course, we know there is a dark side, as I call it, to the work that I do, because of course, you've got people who are homophobic, you've got people who are chauvinistic, you've got people who are racist, you've got all of these. But you've also got many people who do want to learn,
yeah,
and they're being dragged into the space of you can't say this, you can't say that. But how are you going to know if we don't have dialogue and
yeah,
curiosity and bravery and vulnerability? How are we going to move it forward? So I'm really in the business of human connection. That's the
yeah,
currency that I operate in.
yeah,
And I just will always advocate for coaching. I think coaching is one of the best self-care tools you can have. And the coaching that I do and the clients that I have and the organizations that I work with, it gives me goosebumps every time because I can see the shift.
mm,
And I talk about transformation as opposed to change.
mm,
It's really around what transformation can you make as a person,
mm,
and I can make. And I like bringing in that self awareness because it genuinely starts with you. It starts with me as a person and being radically honest with me, and
yeah,
and vice versa, right? So
yeah.
that's kind of a long-winded way of what I do, but yeah, that's what I do.
Wonderful, wonderful, and this is why I love you so much, Nicole,
Oh,
and why we connect so well. I think authenticity. I've said to you before, it's one of my core values as well, and I always come back to. I'm a big Oasis fan as well, and I always
that's my
come back
son's
to.
name.
Yeah,
My son's called Oasis. He was born
wonderful.
before the band.
Aha, there
Just
you
I'm
go.
just putting it out there. But
You
my
did.
son's called Oasis.
It's what a fantastic name. Yeah, one of my favorite bands as well. And I always look to when I think about authenticity as well. I always think to one of their quotes from a song that they did called Supersonic. I'm just
Mhm.
looking at it now. I always remind myself, and it's you need to be yourself because you can't be no one else. And
Absolutely.
that's kind of at the core of who I am and helping people. And it's interesting that you talk about that kind of like coaching to help people to discover that and to kind of align with that as well. And it's certainly part of my kind of approach as a coach is to I'm thinking in the space of kind of working with neurodivergent clients where I kind of
Mhm.
work within that space of helping them to actually be comfortable with who they are and themselves and
Mhm.
and, and
Mhm.
again, that kind of societal barriers that have kind of
Mhm.
like put in our place to
Mhm.
stop us being ourselves and kind of help prevent us from actually reaching that point of authenticity and alignment as well. So again, I'm down with that fact that you've kind of said, coaching is a real kind of tool for empowerment and unlocking and creating change 100% as well. But
Absolutely.
I'd really like to know a little bit more about your story, Nicole, particularly from a perspective of neurodivergence as well. And I know you shared with me before, and that it's something that you don't really kind of like talk that openly about your experience of being a neurodivergent leader as well, and a neurodivergent human being. But I wonder if you might want to talk about that a little bit with our listeners on today's show and explain a little bit about yourself, your neurodivergence, and your journey.
Yeah, and I think for me, and as we were talking before we went on air, so to speak, around that people kind of don't, some people, some organizations, some establishments don't believe that neurodiversity even exists.
Yeah.
But for me, I always found it difficult to read. I just couldn't pronounce the words. Even now, anyone who's been trained by me or heard me speak, I mean, I did a podcast with Joe, and when you listen to that, you'll hear me stumbling over words that I just can't pronounce, which I just can't pronounce properly. And it was almost like I felt like, why can't I just learn to read? Like everyone else can just do it
Mm,
so flawlessly, so
mm,
effortlessly.
mm,
And also again, the way that I create my slide decks, whenever I do that, they're very visual
mm,
because I'm not very good at reading off slides because then you'll hear the nervousness, and also spelling. And most people might say, oh, but not everybody can spell and everybody makes those mistakes. And that's probably true. I'm not saying that any of you have to be neurodiverse to not be able to spell, but I
mm,
found that I
mm,
struggled from a very early age, which made me lose interest.
mm,
And even to this day, I will still say, like, my husband's always correcting me. He's a teacher, and I always say I'm just not an academic.
Yeah.
And he's like, Nick, you really, really are. And I think to just to prove that I was clever and I wasn't thick, quote unquote, or I wasn't stupid, or I wasn't dumb, I kept craving education. So I did my masters.
Yeah.
I did my degrees. I do different courses almost to prove to myself that you are worthy, you are
Like
good enough.
validation.
You've absolutely. And I think it's when I was at university, it was my fourth year, funny enough, that I was diagnosed with dyslexia.
Okay.
And I did the test and what have you. And at that point, they could help you with extra time for your assignments,
Yeah.
exams, give you a computer, what have you. But I was literally, I think, in the last 6 months, which was a shame because if I'd known beforehand, because as soon as I got that help and that assistance,
Yeah.
I definitely thrived.
Yeah.
And I was able to probably get a better grade than I probably would have.
Yeah.
And what that does for you, especially in class when you're at school and the teacher wants you to read, and you've got people giggling and
Yeah.
stuff. And again, when I talk about belonging, I talk about my own journey. And when I spoke about vulnerability, you bring yourself into that space because then you're able to transfer the path that you've walked and share that with others, so others feel confident and brave enough and comfortable enough to share their journey too.
Yeah.
So even when I was asked to be a part of the book that I wrote, I thought I can't write a book. I said I haven't got a clue. And I'm better at speaking, to be fair, than to write. Because what I would do is I would change it. I would know what the bigger word is, but I would swap it out for a simpler word because I couldn't spell the bigger word. When I was in work as well, in organizations, and you're in a team meeting, your manager might say, right, we're going to take turns to take the minutes. I would literally get into a panic attack because I knew that one, I probably couldn't read my own writing afterwards because I've tried to spell a word. I'm trying to spell this word, but people are still speaking. I didn't have the confidence to say, sorry, could you just stop a second? Let me just quickly capture that. Where now I probably would. So again, it just felt like I was being confrontational or you're being lazy because you don't want to do it. But I just couldn't say, sorry, it's because I'm dyslexic. And I have said this to people, and people are like, "Oh my God, you don't seem like you're dyslexic." And I'm thinking, "Well, what does that mean?"
What does that even look like, right?
Yeah, what does that mean? So what you do, like anything, is that you lean on the other strength that you have. So that could be speaking or whatever that is. But as we know, communication, writing is key, and reading is key. So to have to be doing it publicly, say when you're at work or what have you, or I just think differently, I process things differently. And sometimes I don't get it the first time or the second time or the third time or even the fourth time. Once
Yeah.
I get it, I run with it and I'm good. But sometimes it's around speaking up and saying, sorry, can you just say that again? Because I just genuinely don't get it. And you don't people like rolling their eyes and oh, here we go again. And
Yeah.
especially when um an educator would say that just before you're about to leave or just before a break. Has anyone got any questions? And you think, I didn't understand anything you've just said, really, and I really
Yeah.
need it broken down. But
Yeah.
you don't want to do that because people want to leave or what have you. So
Yeah.
it can be a very, very lonely space.
Yeah.
And even when you have been diagnosed and you have been told this is what you have, or this is how you just think differently,
Yeah.
it's still being able to communicate that to others. So even though I then realized all this time, okay, it makes sense now. So as soon as I was
Yeah.
diagnosed as being dyslexic and I did some research around it and I was able to understand what that meant, I saw myself in that. I understood, okay, that fortunately, that was now a puzzle that was now fixed, so to speak, or put into place, should I say.
Yeah.
But now I have to tell everybody else. And
Yeah.
then that's another part of the journey, having to explain that. So I felt I was still masking, I was still coding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even though I had the knowledge, it didn't make me feel better publicly
No.
because I just didn't really want to have to say that because of again of what people's going to think, or does that mean I'm not going to be progressed, or does that mean I'm not going to even get the job? I'd never say it in a job interview. And I think I only really told people in my last job that I was dyslexic, in the last role that I was in, because then I started to get comfortable with it. And because the term neurodiversity came about, I
Yeah.
was like, thank the heavens
Yeah.
that we're going to recognize this. And now I'm in a position that I
Yeah.
do talk about belonging. So I
Yeah.
talk about all aspects of diversity because there's so many different layers.
Yeah.
And it, when it comes to panic attacks, I mean, I don't know as much around autism or ADHD or dyspraxia.
Mm.
But the thing is, I know they exist, and it's like, leaders, what are you doing to accommodate? Because we're moving away from this cultural fit and we're moving to cultural add, and everyone can add in some way or somehow. If you're accommodating them, people can flourish, shine, and grow. So yeah. So for me, it was quite difficult at first because I didn't know what was going on. I just thought I was stupid, to be honest. And I just thought reading's not for me, academia is just not for me.
Yeah.
But I'm from a background where my parents wanted us to go to university and we were pushed. But if you don't feel that that's your vibe, it's really challenging because you think I actually can't do this. And then if you can't do it, you're then seen as a failure per se.
Yeah.
So there's a catalogue of other emotions that come with it that then could trigger depression, that could trigger all these other things, just from that route. So for me, I found out in the fourth year of uni. So I knew then, but then I still wasn't open enough to say I'm dyslexic. But now I can stand on a stage in front of 200 people, 400 people, 10 people, 50 people, whatever, and say, what are you doing about your neurodiverse people in your organization? And you've probably got people in this room who are, and you don't know, because there isn't that psychologically safe space for people to actually say. And we've got some fantastic tools out there, like Grammarly. I heard about Grammarly quite late. We've got some fantastic tools, and it's not just for neurodiverse people, it's for everybody. And some people who are not dyslexic love Grammarly because it works for them. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, or when we talk about a particular pillar in diversity, it's not just for Black people or just for people of color or just for the LGBTQ community or just for neurodiverse. It's for everybody. And that's why I say that the currency that I operate in is human connection. It's about being human centric. Because I've said this quite a few times recently. Nobody rocks up and says to you, so how's your gender today? How's your dyslexia today? How's your Blackness going? How's your religion? You don't do that. You say, hi, Mike, how are you? Hi, Nicole, how was your weekend? So these labels really put people in this really fixed mindset of what that should look and feel like. And that's the problem, really. So that's what I would say around that.
No, it's really interesting, and thank you for sharing so openly about your journey as well, isn't it? And I'd echo. I think as someone also who was late to diagnosis party, certainly I wasn't diagnosed till much later in life, and I'd kind of also kind of tried to sort of fit in and hadn't fit in and didn't understand why, and learnt tools, techniques, and strategies to survive, basically, right? Not to thrive, just to survive, just to kind of fit into that kind of neurotypical design model of what normal is, right? But
what normal is exactly. And I think because of what I went through, because my sister's dyslexic as well, and I think she found out at uni, she's older than me. And then because I did so much research around it, my son, the one I was just telling you about, funny enough, is that I noticed it in him when I was doing his homework. So I was able to almost nip it in the bud quite quickly. So I spoke to the school, and he was also diagnosed with dyslexia. And it really made me giggle because he used to just tell everybody, I'm dyslexic. And he was proud because he didn't see it as a deficiency, because I didn't want him to, because I know what, and at that point, I still hadn't got to a point of talking about it publicly or telling my colleagues or saying it in a job interview, but I just didn't want him to have that. And he didn't. He quite happily will say it in an interview as well. Like, so how does your organization support anybody who's dyslexic? Because the thing is that even now, if I'm sending you an email, I will have to read that email 50,000 times before I send it.
It's exhausting, isn't it?
And then it is I tell you what is just a fantastic tool for me is that when you've got the microphone and you can speak into it and you can translate. So, I mean, not that I'm not advertising anything here, but Otter's brilliant for that. I used that when I was doing my book. And that's perfect for me because, and Google obviously as well.
Adaptive technology.
And going back to what you were saying, to survive. But when you think about it, somebody who's not neurodiverse will just probably find it easier just to send an email. If I have to send an email and capture everything, that's why I like bulletproofs. If I see like a really long email, I just can't grapple with it.
No.
I
No.
can't grapple with it. I'm not going to read all of it. I find that my brain starts to just fry with that. If you give
Yes.
me clear bullet points, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Hence, my slides are very visual
Yeah.
because I will see a picture and then I'll be able to run with that topic. If you put too much text for me, it's not going to work.
No.
And this is, this is what I found as well that was quite crippling was words that are quite similar
Yeah.
to, and in the what do you call it, the spell check,
Mm.
it's going to just spell it to a word that exists in the dictionary, but that
Yeah.
might not be the word that I want. So I would
Yeah.
then have to highlight the word, right click, go to thesaurus, check that the meaning of that word is the
Mm.
one that I want. Now, if you can think about how long that's going to take somebody in your team to do that, it's going to look like you're being slow. Like I said, you're being lazy, you're missing deadlines because I'm double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking.
Yeah.
Then, if I read an email after I've sent it
Mm.
and I realize there's a spelling mistake or a word missing, I literally go into a panic attack, even now in my own business. And
Mm.
I almost feel like I have to correct it and resend it. So a
Yeah.
client could end up getting 3 or 4 different emails from me. But at
Yeah.
least now I will say to them, because I'm dyslexic, I've looked back, I've realized I've made a mistake and I just have to correct it. So apologies that you've got the email 4 times, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure that I was being clear.
Yeah.
And sometimes I still feel embarrassed. I'll be honest, I still do.
Yeah.
But I'm on a journey of being me and having the courage to be me. Um,
Self-acceptance and yeah.
100%.
Self-advocacy is not an easy thing to do, is it either?
No.
Like you talked about, Nicole, there. It's one thing when you're open to the journey and you're on the journey and you're kind of doing the whole diagnosis thing, and if that's working for you, because that's not always easy either.
Hmm.
And then actually realizing that that's actually the starting point. So actually getting to that point of actually that understanding and then the dots connecting, you
Yeah,
realize that, oh, wow, now I can start climbing the mountain, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah,
And sometimes survival techniques are exhausting,
yeah,
where you want techniques that's just assisting you. So, I'd be interested with your listeners, if
yeah,
any of this resonates with them, if they could kind of, if you've got your comments open afterwards to like
yeah,
tell us your story and tell us what your survival techniques has been. And,
absolutely.
how has that helped you or how has it hindered you?
Yeah,
Because the more we talk about this and the more we share each other's stories around this, it
yeah,
actually helps. So if anyone
yeah,
listening, they do find that what this conversation to think, oh my
yes,
God, that's me, or oh my God, that's
yeah,
my child, or that's someone I know.
yeah,
Share, please share with us so we know what your journey is, and if there's any
yeah,
tools out there that has helped you, let us know as well,
yeah.
because I'd be quite happy to use them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think some of them you've talked about today, and I've certainly had a really good experience using things like Grammarly, because I'm dyslexic as well. I'm bordering on severe dyslexic as
Yes.
well. And like yourself, I kind of share that common journey. Listen, I hated school. I'll be honest with you. I kind of school
Me
just
too.
didn't connect for me at all. And like yourself, Nicole, you're a very highly intelligent, creative lady. You know what I mean? But school
Bless
just
you.
didn't connect. It didn't offer you a way and a means and a vehicle to utilize and play to your strengths, right? Because it was in a set way, in a set box. You had to fit that or ship out, right? And I shipped out. I just didn't connect, and then I totally lost all kind of engagement in my last final
Hmm.
final couple of years at school. I just thought, what's the point? Disconnected and went my own way. My education started, I think, when I left school, if I'm being honest with you, and I went into like the workplace. And even then, that hadn't been a perfect journey, and that's been a journey of self-discovery as well. But actually, when I found there were other ways to do things, and I think
Yes.
when I started that journey of acceptance and openness, and
Yes.
listen, now I'm the most out neurodivergent person you're probably ever likely to meet. I'm completely out about it now, and it feels like a massive relief to be out about it.
Yeah.
All those
Agreed.
years, all those decades of kind of like being in the closet, for want of a better word, and not being able to kind of be out there and be myself. I wasn't authentic for the first 35 years of my life. I was completely unauthentic because I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to be like
Yeah.
everybody else, and not be kind of labeled. I'd do anything, to be kind of not labeled as lazy, slacker,
Right.
not
Right.
not a functional member of the team or whatever it is. I wanted to kind of do whatever it took to do that. So like you, I'd kind of spend ridiculous amounts of time kind of reading documents, or if I was given a piece of work to do, for example, that involved lots of writing and reading, it'd take me 15 times longer than it would anyone else.
Yeah,
But I'd never share that. I'd go to great lengths of avoidance to actually talk about that and share that, and then place that mental burden on myself, because I just didn't feel safe to be able to share that with anyone else, because I didn't want judging, I didn't want stereotyping. I wanted
right.
people to love me for who I was, but the fact of the matter is I didn't love me for who I was. So how could that possibly
Exactly.
happen, right? And that's kind of,
Yeah.
that might resonate and echo with other people. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Nicole?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I tell you something, there's some jobs in life that I knew I would be able to smash it out the park. But then
Mm,
when I looked at what the recruiting process was, we're
yeah.
going to have to do these tests.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're timed
Yeah.
tests. And
Yeah.
they haven't said on them, if you are neurodiverse, you'll have more
No.
time. Those
No.
pattern tests are just,
Yeah.
I'm never going to. So if you're going to judge me,
Psychometrics testing we're talking
don't
about
get
right
me
now,
started.
listeners.
Don't get me started. And I actually got into a big conversation on LinkedIn a few weeks ago,
Mm.
before I took my LinkedIn break, which I take quite often at the minute. But I got into
I
this
wish we could talk
conversation.
about. I wish we could talk about that as well, but I don't think we're gonna have time today. But
I
maybe
know,
we might have
right?
to come back on that one.
I know, right? So it's so these tests, I just, and plus, I mean, I think what my issue was, what my issue is with the tests is that some recruiters are taking that report as gospel.
Yeah.
Firstly, I don't like the fact that it comes back with what your weaknesses are. I don't like the
No.
term. I
No.
find it
Agreed.
extremely negative. It should
Yeah.
be something like points for further potential development, because I may
Yeah.
not agree with the test.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But if my
Totally.
manager or if my HR team are taking the test and they're not conversational and to say, what do you think? Does this resonate with you? We shouldn't be looking at a piece of paper
No.
and taking that value over somebody
Yeah.
else, how they're telling you.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that they're timed tests.
Yeah.
That alone, anybody with anxiety, anyone that
Yeah.
doesn't work well under pressure,
Yeah.
even that
Yeah.
language works well under pressure. When you see that in a JD,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
running
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
hills. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Somebody who's going to fit into our team. That
Yeah.
language alone, not doing it.
It's completely
So
alienating, isn't it?
absolutely. So I feel that inclusive language is huge. We always talk about this,
Yeah.
but these tests as well, I don't think they're favourable,
No.
unless they're going to be used as a part of the whole process, not
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
process. If that makes sense, there
Yeah.
has to be a conversation. And plus, on some
Totally.
people will say they've taken the same test for 20 years and got the same results.
Yeah.
Others will tell you on every given day, it just depends on how they're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes these questions that they ask, none of them apply to me, but because you can't
No.
get to the next one, you
Yeah.
have to answer it.
Yeah.
So somebody for me who is dyslexic as well, in
Yeah.
terms of reading some of these words, if I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
understand what one of the words says, I would like to have time to go
Yeah.
and research it, Google it, and find out what does that mean, so
Yeah.
I know what I'm answering. So
Yeah.
when it comes to somebody who is neurodiverse,
Yeah.
these tests are just they're not. You're not going to get your talent from us.
No. No. They
You're
are not.
excluding us.
Totally, absolutely. Listen, 100% down with that completely. And you're talking to someone who's failed probably 25 of them in
Oh,
my
me
in my
too.
in my, in my working career, for jobs I was overqualified for, overexperienced for, but I couldn't pass this damn test, right? Because this test was essentially a filtering mechanism to filter out people like me who think
Yep,
differently.
exactly,
The tests are designed for a linear way of thinking, and when you don't think
exactly,
in a linear way, then you're not going to break through that barrier, are you, as well? So absolutely.
exactly.
And anyone listening to the show that is kind of finding challenges in terms of like job hunting or recruitment, and questioning themselves for not being able to pass these tests, don't question yourselves, okay? Right, it's the tests that are wrong, not you.
Yeah, and also again with your listeners, if you've got somebody who's listening and doesn't agree with our point of view, please challenge us and
Yeah,
put
please.
your viewpoint, because it may be something you may have a different point around that, or we may be saying something that's maybe not complete for you.
Yeah,
Challenge and say, "Do you know what? These tests are good because of A, B, and C." And this is why I say that if they are used as a part of the whole process,
that's the
but
thing,
not
isn't it?
the process, that's the difference. But to be fair, if I know that I've got to take a test, I'm not going to go for the job. I'm going to pull myself
And
out of
there's
the
the
process.
thing, right? And there's the thing. I think you just hit the nail on the head there, right? Is that many, not all, because again, it's not right to kind of patch everybody in, but many, myself included, would now, if those tests appeared, I'd actively avoid it. I'd swerve it,
Me
because
too,
I just knew that it's
100%.
just not gonna. All it's gonna do is it's gonna riddle me. It's gonna take me back to a place. It's gonna send
Yeah,
triggers. It's going to make me feel riddled with
Yeah.
anxiety and stress. And why would I want to put myself through that for
It's
your
going to
job?
shrink me. And like you say, there's things that can trigger us because as people, we're made up of so much different layers again. And I talk a lot around generational and systemic beliefs and values.
Yeah,
And also around experiences. And as I said, I talk about belonging, and I
yeah,
always try and speak to my audience around think of a time where you felt like you didn't belong. Lots of people can probably think of it in their adult life, but
yeah,
can
yeah,
definitely think of it in their childhood.
yeah,
And when I think around these tests, it shrinks me and brings me
yeah,
back to that very uncomfortable place of where I don't feel secure, I don't
yeah,
feel welcomed, I feel like I'm going to be judged, and
yeah.
that anxiety alone is just not worth it. So I
No,
will remove myself from the
yeah,
process.
yeah, yeah,
So if anyone else has actually gone through that, where as soon as you realize you've got to do this test,
yeah,
you've just given up already. Your motivation has just plummeted right down to
yeah,
ground zero.
yeah.
And I think organizations have to be quite aware of the psychological drainage that can do.
I think you gave a very good point. I think, Nicole, about it to be used as I get trying to understand how people's brains work, right? But you have to understand the full picture of how someone's brain works. So I don't think you
Yeah,
can draw conclusive evidence based on a series of tests that we could argue whether they're valid or not anyway, the validation behind them. But actually,
right.
if you're using them as a kind of a piece, as a bigger picture, and like you said, I think, which I've not seen, by the way, and I've got quite a few psychologist friends who I've had these debates with, and mostly agreed on my side, some don't. But again, it's always great to kind of have that conversation. But I think what you said about the kind of, as part of the process, would be to kind of, the right thing to do would be to open up those and say, well, this is what the test came back with. What are your thoughts on this? You know,
Absolutely.
then I think a conversation around it is a different perspective altogether. I think if it's used as part of a bigger, broader assessment process
Absolutely.
involving much more neuro-inclusive friendly processes as well, then absolutely I can
Yeah.
see some value perhaps in that.
Yeah. And the thing is, the reason why I even mentioned that, Mike, is because I've had coachees, I've had group coaching where
Mm,
that has been the topic of discussion. I've had
mm,
people
mm.
come into my sessions and your usual like, what are you bringing to the session today? Let's do
Yeah,
it, because I always like have people have that 10-minute rant just to get grounded,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it will be, I've just had that flipping test and my manager's telling me this, that, and the, and it really genuine. And what the
Let's take
problem
a seat.
is,
We're going to need some time.
and then the thing is, I've looked, sometimes they've let me see the test, but the only thing as humans that we concentrate on is the weaknesses and the
Yes, yes,
negative things
yes.
that have
Yeah,
come back
yeah.
from the test. So you've got to be really careful because, again, we don't know what's that's triggering in people.
And we're not
Because we
problems
don't
to
know.
be fixed, right? You know, we're not
Right,
problems to be fixed as human beings. We're human beings
right.
who are brilliant. We've got the tools, strategies, coping mechanisms, you know, the talent within us, but we're not something to be fixed, right? And I think that's
No,
perhaps where these
exactly.
tests take you down the path of trying to sort of fix you and work out what's wrong with you.
Yeah, I mean, and I, like you mentioned, you've done quite a few, and I've done quite a few in my time as well. And
Not successfully, I might add.
and you know something? I was gonna say there was one that I did. I wish I could remember the name of it. And no word of a lie, Mike. It is that 98% accurate.
Yeah,
It's shockingly accurate. And
yeah,
this was the easiest one that I did. It literally said how they had a load of words and said,
yeah,
how do you see yourself? And you could tick as many as you liked. And then it said, and how do you think other people see you? And you
yeah,
can
yeah,
tick as many as you like. And that's
yeah,
the only one for me that
yeah.
has come back where I could literally say, you want to employ me? Well, back in my employment days, not now.
Yeah.
You want to
No.
employ me? There you go. Read
Yeah.
that. If I'm your girl, give me a call. Literally, I could have used that report to say,
And that's the
this is
difference.
me.
That could be, isn't it? You know, if
Right.
these things were done right,
Yeah.
actually there is potential there, but they'd need to adapt and be done right and take into context the bigger picture and the fact that we don't all think in the same way.
Absolutely. But you need that diversity of thought. There's
100%.
an example that I give in my sessions. I don't know if the last session at Culture and Culture if I said it there, but I mean I'm not into politics or anything like that.
Mm,
But
mm,
if you look at our current cabinet, if you see the visual diversity, yes, there's
mm,
gender, yes, there's colour, but
mm.
what about the way that they all think or have been educated or been, where how people socialize?
Yeah,
You have to have diversity of thought.
Yeah.
You have to have different things in the room, and different opinions and thoughts in the room. And I read this article in Forbes a few years ago, and basically what they were saying is that if you're going to hire a band, you're going to hire all the different instruments. You're
Yeah.
not just going to go for, unless it's a solo with just,
Yeah.
maybe the
Yeah.
keyboard or just the piano or just the
Yeah.
guitar. But if you're going for a fully functional band or
Mm.
orchestra, look at the amount of instruments that are in that. And what are they all doing? Making music.
Yeah.
If you're going to a buffet, you're not going to go to an all pasta buffet, are you?
No.
Or an all rice buffet. You want that. What you love about the buffet is the variety.
How
So
boring is
how
that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So why are we not looking at the variety of people, the variety of
Definitely.
thought, the
Yeah.
variety of everything that's wonderful about humans? More connects us than separates us, and that's
Yeah.
from Black Panther One.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I use that a lot more. We talk a lot about
Yeah.
differences, and even though we try to put a positive spin on it, when
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
say the word difference, you're
Yeah.
potentially it can have a negative connotation just because of the
Yeah.
way the media has transferred words and
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
if we look at what connects us as opposed to what separates us, there's a lot going on there. Some good stuff, some
Absolutely.
really good stuff.
Yeah, I'm 100%. And listen, I'm acutely aware of time, Nicole. Now
Yes. Oh my gosh.
we've got other you've got other meetings and things like that. So and this is
We've got to
ridiculous
do
for
a
me
part two.
acting as the timekeeper. But before we go, just with our listeners, share with us, if you would, what are your greatest strengths? And if we're talking about strengths, and your greatest strengths as being a dyslexic, neurodivergent entrepreneur leader, what are they?
Adaptability. I think being able to adapt, but also one of my greatest strengths now is listening.
Mm,
There's something about that weight model that I love. Why am I talking?
mm.
I can talk for England because I can assure you, if I didn't have a meeting, we'd be here till 5 o'clock this evening. I can promise you. We're going to have to do part two. um,
And I'd enjoy
but
that very much.
yeah, I think it's around being adaptable.
Mm,
There's a few things. I talk about this with my signature program, that radical self-awareness, and really taking accountability. So every conversation I have, like this one, I'll be thinking about it all day. I'll
mm,
be thinking about some of the stuff that we spoke about, what have
mm,
I learned from it? What did I share?
mm,
I've also learned around the power of vulnerability,
mm,
because, as I say, I operate with humans and human connection.
mm,
And it's around that trust piece, it's around that brave space, it's around that courage, it's around
mm.
safety, it's around curiosity, all the things that we've spoken about in this wonderful podcast. So my strengths are growing, and I'm evolving in this
Yeah.
space. And I say this to my clients who want to go on that belonging journey with me. You are going to come out of this evolving. You are going to come out of this into a magical space if you just embrace it. Don't preempt it. Try and remove or be aware of those bias that turn up and those stereotypes. Lean into uncomfortabilities. So being able to have that power, to have those honest conversations with people, and people are doing it
Mm.
and listening. I think that's my probably that's one of my greatest strengths at the moment. Being able to lead and influence, because
Fantastic.
I'm stepping into rooms where I'm able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I know there's a lot of split opinion on the language around superpowers, particularly in neurodivergence. Some see that they have, some see that actually, well, maybe not so much, because there's so many other challenges in my life on a daily basis that, how can it be a superpower? And I get that, but I think focusing on strengths is really important, regardless of whether you call it superpower or not. Actually focusing on the strengths that we have, the unique strengths that we have because of our unique ways of thinking, I think is really important to play on and to utilize that. So
And I
thank you.
think, yeah, and I think and I want our listeners just to finish, is to think about what are your strengths,
Mm,
and all of us are on this amazing journey, and I call it my spiritual awakening. And bloody hell, it's such a roller coaster. Sometimes
mm,
I don't know.
mm.
I'm a Disney fan, so I don't know if anyone's ever watched Tangled, and where Rapunzel actually comes out of the tower for the first time and she has a complete and utter meltdown. That's me on most
Yeah.
days. It's like, oh my god, this is great. Oh my god, I'm not doing this. How can I do this? Who am I? Yeah, that's me. So it'd be
That'll
really good.
resonate with a lot of our listeners, I can tell you.
Honestly, I'm proper, like I'm like this, right? So it'd be really good to know, what is your strength? What are you
Yeah.
working on? What are
Mm,
some of those beliefs that you've dropped and that no longer serve you?
mm,
And what are you bringing into your life that is serving you? And how are you navigating your own path and your own journey to become the authentic, lovable you, where the world just has to adjust. So that's what I'd like to leave on.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Can I ask you one more question
Of
before you
course you
go?
can.
One more question. What's been most useful to you from this conversation today?
Seeing you. It's been a long time
Apart
coming.
from that.
I think what's been most useful is us being able to, you actually having this platform and sharing people's stories. And it's probably the first time I've ever spoken about um, my dyslexia
Thank you.
and my fears in this such depth. So it's really given me a tick next to something else that I've now faced. Because if anyone else who has heard me speak, even if you haven't, I've got two definitions of fear, and it's to fuck everything and run, or to face everything and rise.
We're an
And
R
I was,
rating now, Nicole, by the way.
I'm sorry.
Don't apologise. I just have to put an R
Oh,
rating on it now.
okay. So you can edit that bit out. But
No,
I've
no,
got
no.
two.
It's
Okay.
authentic. I'm not editing anything out.
So so yeah. So for me, I always would do that. The first one, I would just
Yep.
run. And I think doing this podcast has made me face another fear and be able to say I stepped out of my comfort zone and I made it my comfort zone and I owned it. So thank you for inviting me and thank you for allowing me to have the space to do this.
Oh no, thank you, and thanks for sharing that as well. That's absolutely wonderful, and it's been an absolute honour, a privilege, and a pleasure
Thank
to
you.
have you on the on as a guest on this first series of new podcasts
Thank
around
you.
neurodiverse superstars as well. So which you very much are, Nicole, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us as well. So
Oh,
yeah,
thank you.
and yeah, so that's it from me, Nicole, for this first edition of the Neurodivergent Superstars podcast. And we hope that some of what we've talked about today resonates. And as Nicole said, please do continue the conversation and share with us kind of what you've taken away from this, and also how this might be able to help you on your journey as well, because that's the intention of this podcast, is to help and support people too on their journeys as well. So once again, thank you everyone for listening to the podcast, and thank you very much again, Nicole, for being part of it.
Thank you. Thank you.